Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here on YouTube, and welcome to another album of the week. This is episode number 168, and today's episode is a spotlight on the self-titled debut album from a pretty obscure Belgium hard rock / heavy metal band. It is White Heat. Okay, and again, these guys are again pretty obscure. The only way you probably would have known about these guys if you at least had been one of those folks, just like me, that pretty much dug into, like the Mausoleum Records label with all the bands like Killer and Crossfire and that. So that's where you probably would have at least found out about these guys. Other than that, these guys are pretty obscure. So it's time to dive into the obscurity of White Heat. Now, since there's really not a whole lot of, let's say, history and information around White Heat, when they completely formed and when everything, completely got started, there's not a whole lot of it, but there's only a bit of a small bits of it, and that's pretty much is taken from the 2021 Lark Records reissue of the first White Heat album, and of course the other two as well. So they've got at least a bit of small information around them, and probably good bullet point information, the stuff you probably just need to really know about, about White Heat and everything. So this is all I can go by here. So by the end of the 70s, Robbie Walter, who of course is one of the guitar players in the band, and the other guitar player in the band, Dick Kleber, who again, two guitar players from Antwerp, Belgium, decided they had enough songs to form a band and get on the road. Thus, White Heat was born. That's pretty much just the only thing I would say that's more like bullet points, but it's at least probably pretty decent enough information, and probably all you need to know about any sort of background. You already pretty much know about who are the two guys that started White Heat. So Robbie Walter being, who of course is still with the band today, pretty much being one of the founding members, along with Dirk Kleber. Those are pretty much the two founding members of White Heat. So, the other thing that I would say is a really good bullet point in terms of the history information surrounding White Heat is that sometime in 1981, before they even released their first record, according to the biography write-up and the 2021 Lark Records reissue of the White Heat albums, White Heat opened for Ted Nugent in Forest National, Brussels. And that's where, after that, they were offered a record deal. They say Mausoleum Records. However, I think that's misinformation, because Mausoleum, yes, it was founded in 1982, but that's not really the first label that actually released the record, because Mausoleum was only the one that pretty much re-released it pretty much in 1983. What should have been the label that should have been in place of Mausoleum should have been Lark Records. This also the same label that signed the Killer from Belgium. Which again, both White Heat and Killer were on. They were from Belgium, and they were the two bands that had really early records released on Mausoleum Records in its first year in 1983. So, because the first Killer record on Mausoleum was Ready for Hell, and that was Skull, and I've got the Colosseum up. I have the Colosseum up. It was Skull 8301. The first White Heat record was Skull 8303. So I think that there's a little bit of some misinformation in the one for the Lark Records one. It's very bare bones. at the same time, but it's really slightly a little bit misinformation, because again, Mausoleum were formed in 1982 but didn't start releasing records until sometime in around early of 1983. So I think it should have been Lark, because Lark was the first one to actually release the first White Heat record, and that's the one I think where they really got, I would say, the earliest record deal, maybe from them. But it might have, who knows, it might have only been a record deal just for that record. But White Heat didn't, of course, later on, they didn't really stay with Lark and Mausoleum. They went to a different label for the very next record, which I'll get into very much after when I'm done, pretty much talking about the first White Heat album and, being focused on it. But either way, by the time they pretty much got their deal with Lark Records, by the next year, they finally released the first White Heat album. And it doesn't really say what year that, the record was being recorded, but it could have been sometime in late 81 or early 1982. So by then, we all know that this probably has already reached its 40th anniversary, but who knows when, in 1982, that this album was released through Lark Records. But either way, it does get released, and here we are with the self-titled debut from these guys. So, if you are not very familiar with White Heat and their overall sound, and you may be more familiar with, let's say, The Killer from Belgium, well, there is some similarities here and there, but not too much similarities. Because Killer from Belgium are pretty much, they always got tagged as Belgium's answer to like Motorhead in a way. They got they were pretty much were kind of pigeonholed as a bit of a Motorhead-esque band. However, with White Heat, there is a little bit of those slight rocking moments, very similar to something like Rock and Roll Fan or some of the more sort of boogie songs that you probably would have got on those first two Killer records. But for the most part, it's not nearly as like heavy and as very loud like, let's say, Killer. Instead, the best sort of comparisons I can give you to White Heat is mostly a bit of a crossbreed with sort of the new wave or British heavy metal bands, or even other European bands, let's say like Baron Rojo, but also a little bit of slight American tendencies, mostly on the kind of Southern or Texas kind of side. For example, I can't really say that the Southern rock influences or comparisons are going to be to something like Lynyrd Skynyrd or Molly Hatchet, but more so like, let's say, Blackfoot, or even maybe to an extent Axe, though this is probably heavier, more raw than Axe to an extent. But of course, throwing a little bit of classic sort of ZZ Top in there, mostly some of the early stuff, like Tris Hombres and some of the stuff off of Fandango. That kind of sound like mostly like heard it on the Axe or something like that. That's where you kind of get a little bit of the sound there, or at least where I get my comparisons from. But you take at least a bit of Blackfoot and ZZ Top, but you also combine it with the sort of very pubby, boogie-like of, let's say, AC/DC and Rose Tattoo. And for the most part, there is definitely a bit of that Rose Tattoo kind of boogie-esque-ness to at least some of the songs, mostly for an example with like Babbling Wind and Calling and Keep Cool Girl and Rock and Roll Kick. These are definitely ones that I think come across as very Rose Tattoo-ish a bit. Besides a little bit of that Baron Rojo kind of sound. Everyone really played around with this sort of very hard boogie rock kind of sound. But for the most part, there's also a little bit of that sort of the very Young Brothers-like riffing that really a lot of other new wave or British heavy metal bands was playing around with. For example, like Saxon, for an example, was really playing around with some of those kind of young the young brothers sort of rhythm or guitar riffing. They definitely played around with it, you know, with just the power chords and all of that. They played around with a little bit of that structuring. And that's really heard in songs like Nevermind and I Need of Ya, or In Need of Ya. I think it's pretty much referred to as In Need of Ya. That's where you get most of that kind of sound. And of course, I do need to bring up there's at least 10 songs on the album, and it at least clocks in at 39 minutes and somewhere around pretty much roughly 39 minutes. So it's not that it's probably the longest of the White Heat records. But again, a lot of the sound really kind of plays around with something, you know, like let's say the combination of southern or hard southern rock sound like Blackfoot and even like ZZ Top, but combining with the sort of almost boogie sort of hard rock of like Rose Tattoo and AC/DC. That's where you really get most of that kind of sound, and it's really played around with most of it. The only other song that kind of comes across as very Nugent-esque is the song "Oh Girl," because it really does play around with that kind of, I wouldn't say cat scratch fever kind of riffing, but it kind of plays with that a bit before just going into almost very Rose Tattoo or AC/DC kind of boogie-esque sort of composition. But that's the only sort of really other sort of American kind of feel that you get from it. But it's like plays around with sort of combination of American sort of hard rock sound, but also very European sort of hard rock kind of sound. And it definitely is still very rooted within hard rock for the most part, but there's definitely that sort of new wave of British heavy metal flair to it that gives it its European feel to it. So that's pretty much where I get from most of the album. And that's pretty much all you need to know about it. And if you really dig that kind of style, you know, you like Crocus, you'll definitely dig White Heat. And so in a way, to kind of bring up the comparisons between, let's say, White Heat and Killer. Killer being, you know, Belgium's answer a bit to like Motorhead, though I think that's a little bit of a stretch in some places because they definitely have more of a Baron Rojo kind of feel to them as well. But White Heat, on the other hand, are basically, I guess you can say, might be Belgium's answer to like a Rose Tattoo or AC/DC. That's pretty much the best sort of comparisons or something, you know, that can come up with, that can kind of summon up White Heat in a way in terms of their style and sound. And that's pretty much what I just get from it. And it still is a very good kind of record, and it really is one of those really scratches the itch for whenever you have that kind of very much that boogie kind of itch, you know, where you want that kind of Rose Tattoo and AC/DC kind of itch. You know, it's like you've listened to all those kind of records. You've also probably went through some of those, at least some of those Crocus records, and just some of that. You just went through all of that, but you want at least a little bit more of that kind of style because you want to hear more of it. White Heat, I would say, pretty much comes as close to really scratching some of that itch. Again, it's not the most extraordinary, groundbreaking stuff, but it's just very fun listening, and I enjoy this entire record. I enjoy it. So that's all I can say there. It's just a really fun record from beginning to end, and I can't really say anything bad at all. Again, the album, of course, was produced by at least Leo Falsenstein and, of course, Alfie Falkenbach. Again, they were at least ones that worked on it. That's probably why they ended up being one of the first ones to kind of sign or at least release the first White Heat album under their label in a way, you know, or just re-release it. Why they got away with that. You know, this was where that partnership between White Heat and Mausoleum came from, because of the two guys that were the big founders of the Mausoleum label pretty much worked on it. And if I am correct, I think also Leo, yes, right here, Leo's the one that was the original drummer for Killer. So there's definitely still, though, a bit of a family tree there between White Heat and Killer. So I guess you can say White Heat kind of became the sister band to Killer in a way. They were kind of a sister band besides, you know, Crossfire. Not too much there, but a little bit. but that's only because of the Mausoleum Records ties. But White Heat, of course, had that ties to Lark. Which also, to bring up a little other information about Lark, they're also one of the ones that kind of released Balls to the Wall by Accept, also in, I would say, the Belgium area. So, there you go. But either way, there's at least your, I guess, information about White Heat and the first album here. Again, if this sounds like something you might be interested in, I'd say definitely go check it out. Again, if you can find it on record, it's not that tough to find. You can find any of the pressings, whether it be like the original on Lark or even the re-release on Mausoleum. They're not that difficult to find. As far as CD copies, I think the two of the easiest ones will probably be the one on the Mausoleum Classics, or part of the Mausoleum Classics series in the mid-90s. But, however, there's also the one that Cathargo released in 2021. So there you go. There's at least that. Now, after, of course, releasing their first record here, it wouldn't be too far off before they released their second record, Krakatoa, the following year, and that would have been on their brand new label, 21 Records, I think. It was just, or was it just 21? Let me look up real quick. Yeah, 21 Records. And that would be the following year. And they would stick with 21 Records pretty much until 1985. Or 1986, actually. Until like 1986 or something. Again, 1985 saw the last record, Running for Life. So, they pretty much had split up. And then, eventually, they reformed. Or actually, I wouldn't say reformed, but at least Robbie Walker and bass player Stan Verfeili, hope I pronounced that correctly, pretty much resurrected White Heat, but with a slightly different lineup. So, at least one of the founding members is left in White Heat, but for the most part, there's at least some newer guys in the band. And for these reissues from Cathargo, this new lineup of White Heat, well, you know, with at least two of the original members, with one being the founding member, at least re-recorded 4 songs each from these records to be bonus tracks on these copies. So there you go. And of course, there is at least one brand new song that they did come up with, and I think it was a brand new song that they came up with, and that was just I think in 2020 or 2021, sometime there, they came up with at least a brand new song, and I heard it wasn't on Instagram, but they put it online. But I don't see it being listed on here, so I don't know if it was a brand new song or if it was just one of the re-recordings from the reissues here. Either way, we got at least something from these guys. So for all we know, there is still probably plans to release a brand new record under the White Heat name. So there you go. That's it. Again, I hope all of you enjoyed. This is Heavy Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.